Eric Severine in Washington, David Dick in San Diego, Morton Dean in Kansas City, Missouri, John Hart in Miami, Florida, and Bert Quint in Panama City, Panama.
Good evening. CBS News has learned that U.S. space officials, on the basis of the success so far of Apollo 7, today gave tentative approval for a manned orbital flight around the moon in December. The Apollo 8 flight would not involve an attempt to land on the moon. The three Apollo 7 astronauts, in the fifth day of their 11-day trip around the Earth, put on their second live telecast today, which they billed as the one and only original Apollo orbiting roadshow. The 11-minute performance opened with an introduction and included a tour of the capsule, which appeared larger than it is because of the view through a wide-angle lens.
Okay, we're starting to pick you up. You're looking good. It's a good picture. See the straps in the center seat, 0G.
Patrick, can you see me? I'm at the left seat.
Affirmative.
Okay.
That's Don Isley talking. Now he's holding up a sign.
The lovely Apollo room was high atop everything.
That's right. Coming to you live from outer space, the one and only original Apollo orbiting roadshow. Starring the great acrobats of outer space, Wally Schirra and Walt Cunningham. Yeah.
Just a minute, Wally. Let's see. Oh, it's a little message to Deke Slayton. A little bit closer, Wally. Kind of looks like something about a. Are you a?
That's right.
Looks like it says, "Are you a turtle, Deke Slayton?"
That's right.
And now, Spacecraft Commander Schirra, weightless, floats out of sight.
Here comes another one. Walt, that away. That's the way to turn it. That says, Paul Haney, are you a turtle?
We're going to go square. Perfect square.
And there's no reply to Paul Haney there.
The reason Paul Haney is speechless is that the proper answer to that astronaut joke that dates back to Mercury days is somewhat ribald and unrepeatable. By not answering, Haney now owes the crew of Apollo 7 a round of drinks.
Okay, Apollo 7, Houston, would you close the back pressure valve, go to increase?
Stand by.
That's a real good picture. Might take us on a little tour of your castle there, if you have a chance.
Okay, stand by. I think we can work that out. We'll take it off the bracket and pan the cockpit a little bit.
He's now taking the camera off of its mount and going to hand-hold it as he pans it around the cockpit.
At this point, we're looking across the cockpit over Walt Cunningham's chest towards Don Isley, where he's controlling the spacecraft very carefully for a radiator degradation test. And you see a pin cruising by, and I just make some notes, obviously. Controller is concentrated on the left seat for attitude control. You can see possibly two of the instruments for attitude control over there.
You can see right in the center of your screen now a pencil that the astronaut has let float free in space.
We monitor our systems on this side. At this point, Walt Cunningham is...
You'll notice Walt Cunningham reached out and recovered a pencil floating there. A very positive demonstration of weightlessness. Apollo control here.
Continuing across the cockpit planet to the right, we have most of our electrical power controls, fuel cell control. Then as we continue across the cockpit, we'll come to the right side, and that's the window. And you can see that we have the ventilation set. And with the wide angle lens, this will not show too well.
And The outside doesn't show too well due to the orbit, Wally.
The astronauts' next TV transmission from the capsule is due about 10:10 a.m. Eastern Time tomorrow and will be broadcast live over CBS. All three astronauts reported today having colds or at least stuffy noses, but Commander Schirra says none of them has a fever. Earlier, Schirra was displeased and said so when Houston Ground Control awakened him by mistake an hour early. Schirra said they had asked for extra sleep, and embarrassed ground controllers promised that tonight they'll get it. Forecasters and space officials tonight are keeping an eye on Tropical Storm Gladys, which formed today south of Cuba and threatened to move northward as a hurricane. However, the storm still located some 1,100 miles from the area southwest of Bermuda, where Apollo 7 is scheduled to splash down next week.
High in the Andes of Colombia, South America, it is the finest place in the world for the growing of coffee. Because of our climate and our soil, we can give you more flavor and more body, but not more beans. That's because we pick the beans by hand, a little at a time. Juan Valdez picks only the ripest ones for market. The rest he leaves. Tomorrow, when more beans ripen, he will pick more, and the next day more again. Colombia is the only country in the world that harvests its beans every single day all year long, only when they are ripe. That is why 100% Colombian coffee has more flavor than any other coffee in the world. It is in a class all by itself. There is a brand of Colombian coffee in your supermarket. What to look for is Juan Valdez and the words 100% Colombian coffee right there on the label.
By ironical coincidence, two of George Wallace's favorite targets in the federal judiciary today handed down rulings favoring him in two separate cases. The Supreme Court ordered Ohio to put Wallace's name on its presidential ballot, thus assuring the former Alabama governor's candidacy in all 50 states. The court based its 6-3 decision on the 14th Amendment, the Equal Protection Amendment, which has been the basis of many civil rights rulings. The majority opinion declared that Ohio cannot justify its strict restrictions against third-party movements. The latest polls in the state give Wallace about 20% of the vote. Meanwhile, in Montgomery, federal Judge Frank Johnson, Jr. dismissed a suit charging Wallace with using state money, property, and personnel in his campaign. The judge, a former college friend whom Wallace has often castigated from the platform, said the suit raises serious questions about the political ethics of some high Alabama officials. But he added, even if true, they are questions for state, not federal courts. The rulings came as Wallace campaigned in California, the first state in which he qualified for the ballot. There in San Diego last night, Wallace found heckling of a different sort than he usually draws, and David Dick reports.
It was bound to happen. The hippies, those whom George Wallace calls anarchists, decided to come to one of his rallies and put on a different kind of show.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, this group back here on the left, if you are for me, you'll just let me go ahead and speak. But just wait a minute. I think those are some students that are trying to have some fun here. They're not. You're from the University of California, aren't you? Well, if you're for me, let me go ahead and speak. That's right. You're pretty clever. Pretty clever. But we know all about it, so... That's a group that some pretend they're for us and some pretend they're not, and they're supposed to tangle with each other in a little while, so just watch out for that. That's nothing to that, but just some University of California students who ought to be in the first grade instead of in college, if you want to know the truth about the matter.
Wallace has always looked on hecklers as free stage props. As long as they helped advance the script, they were welcome and appreciated. But when the convenient heckler decided to become the kissing cousin, it was more than George Corley Wallace could stomach.
Why don't you young punks just get on out of the auditorium? Why don't you young punks get out of the auditorium? wind up on this note that you boys had better have your day again, because after November 5th, you are through in this country. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
It was an enormous put-on which rattled Wallace and confused everybody. It was comical for a while, but playfulness skittered on the edge of smiling violence. David Dick, CBS News, with the George Wallace campaign.
Hamburger to go with everything.
Yes. Yes, I'm leaving now.
One of the prices we pay for civilization is what most people call acid indigestion, gas, heartburn, a tense, tight stomach. Well, now there's a modern solution to this distressing problem: Digel. Digel, the extra action antacid with the extra action of simethicone. Look, this white layer of Digel contains effective antacids to neutralize excess acid. This yellow layer contains simethicone in a patented formulation which breaks up bubbles of gas to help relax your tense, tight stomach. Digel with simethicone works as no plain antacid can to give you more complete relief. Digel, the extra action antacid, tablets or liquid.
Before an audience of college students in Kansas City today, Hubert Humphrey restated his position on a Vietnam bombing halt. To his listeners, including many of the reporters who travel with him, he seemed to move closer to calling for a halt. Morton Dean reports.
The Vice President enjoyed one of his most impressive days of the campaign, a round of appearances in Kansas City, producing large and exuberant crowds. And in a visit to Rockhurst College, the Democratic nominee seemed more anxious than ever to leave the impression that he would be more likely to stop the bombing of North Vietnam than either of his opponents or President Johnson.
Now, what did I say at the Salt Lake City? I said I would stop the bombing as an acceptable risk for peace, period. That's what I said. I also said, but I said period, not comma or semicolon. I also said that in making this decision, however, I would look to evidence by word or deed. I said I would look for it. To evidence by word or deed, by directly or indirectly, that the North Vietnamese should restore the demilitarized zone to its status of a demilitarized area. Now, why? Because that's the easiest thing for them to do, because it is an international zone. It means giving up nothing from their own territory. I felt that that was an acceptable risk for peace, what I stated. And let me make it very clear to you that whoever is the next president of the United States is going to have to come to grips with this war one way or another if Mr. Johnson hasn't been able to find an answer to it between now and January 20th, and I hope and pray he will. And I know that he's trying to. I know that as of this hour he's trying to. I think that there are some who think, I have a pretty good idea what the Wallace-LeMay, the Bombsey the twins are thinking about.
One point about which there can be no argument is the fact that ever since Mr. Humphrey delivered his nationally televised Vietnam speech 2 weeks ago, there has been a significant lessening in the amount of anti-Vietnam War hostility directed towards him. In fact, during the past 2 days, during several appearances, he has heard none of it. Morton Dean, CBS News, with the Humphrey campaign in Kansas City.
In spite of the difference in phrasing today, Humphrey himself subsequently said that his position on a bombing halt is unchanged. Richard Nixon today accused Humphrey of employing campaign tactics of fear and smear and called upon him to end it in the interests of decency. Nixon commented as he ended a rest at Key Biscayne and began his final drive for the presidency. John Hart reports.
Nearly everything Richard Nixon does these days is programmed. The last 3 days of guarded privacy and deliberately casual moments such as this one with Jackie Gleason on Key Biscayne. Moments his programmers have labeled photo opportunities. Gleason missed 2 putts. Mr. Nixon, 1.
There he goes.
Get in there.
We were just remarking that the 2 times we played, we played golf 3 times. Yes. Rained every time. That's right. So we had the steak the second time.
Yes, we had steak and refreshments.
Yeah.
I had the refreshments, he had the steak.
That's right. But you cooked the steak.
Yes.
I made the refreshments.
Yes, you did, and very well, too.
A second photo opportunity came at the start of a news conference. Cameras and microphones were prevented from recording Mr. Nixon's remarks. What he said was, a private survey indicates he is ahead in every major state, that in the border states of Florida, North Carolina, and Tennessee, he is about even with George Wallace, whose campaign Nixon thought had topped out. Wallace, he predicted, would finish with around 15% of the popular vote. Nixon predicted Republicans would gain at least 9 seats in the U.S. Senate with a possibility of even winning a majority. For the House, he saw at minimum 30 additional Republicans, a majority of 1. As for his campaign, he is going all out, he said. There will be no days off, he announced, except Sundays.
That planning session, which has just been completed and the results of which I just announced to 100 members of the National Press Corps, is one which will mean that we're undertaking starting today, a day that will take us from Florida to North Carolina to Tennessee, and then on to Kansas City and Missouri, all in one day, that we're beginning the most intensive campaign 3 weeks in history. More issues, more people, more appearances, more miles traveled than any time in history. I call it the blueprint for victory, and that blueprint will have on it, made in Florida.
Richard Nixon believes he will win. His strategy of running measured and cool has offered him the indicators of success. So his decision to sprint in the last weeks of this campaign may reveal not so much a recognition of political realities of 1968 as the painful memories of 1960. John Hart, CBS News with the Nixon campaign, Miami.
Diplomatic observers on both sides of the Atlantic tonight saw, or thought they saw, 2 straws in the wind that offer a glimmer of hope for a breakthrough in the Paris-Vietnam talks. For one thing, enemy action in Vietnam has dropped to a new low. And secondly, Lee Duc-Tho, Hanoi's ranking diplomat in Paris, reportedly will urge Ho Chi Minh to take a more flexible stand at the peace table. Tho stopped over in Moscow on his way from Paris to Hanoi today, and Soviet leaders, with troubles of their own, also are said to be urging conciliation in the Paris talks. The U.S. command in Saigon today reported that the big 16-inch guns of the battleship New Jersey literally had blasted part of a small enemy island into the Gulf of Tonkin. The barrage knocked out at least 1 anti-aircraft battery on Hon Mot Island. It was the ship's northernmost attack yet up that enemy coast. There's a report that read China is starting to withdraw some 50,000 labor troops from North Vietnam. These laborers work mainly in ports, on railroads, and highways. Their withdrawal could mean North Vietnam's transport system, since American bombing restrictions, is getting back to normal. Radio Peking reported today that President Liu Shaoqi has been stripped of all his government and Communist Party jobs. Liu has long been a prime target of Chairman Mao Zedong's so-called Cultural Revolution. And recently, Liu, whom Peking refers to as China's Khrushchev, has been living under virtual house arrest.
Said a jackhammer jockey named Jake.
Riding hammer is sure a rough shake, but this old cigarette makes it seem rougher yet. Got a brand that'll give me a break?
Oh, try a Newport. You'll like Newport. Smoother, more refreshing to your taste.
Said the guy with the shovel.
At ease. Newport's the answer. Try these. Their smooth taste is best. They sure pass the test. The taste is as fresh as a breeze.
Rich tobacco, menthol freshness brightens up your taste with every puff.
The minute Jake tried one, he knew what smooth-tasting Newports can do.
I know it can't be, but it sure seems to me that the jackhammer works smoother, too.
Oh, change to Newport. You'll like Newport. Smoother, more refreshing to your taste.
King size or 100s, Newport smooths and refreshes your taste.
UN Secretary General U Thant has proposed that the Big Four foreign ministers meet to consider ways to make the UN a truly effective peacekeeping organization. And the Thant aide said informal replies from 3 foreign ministers, not including Secretary of State Rusk, have been encouraging. Czechoslovak Premier Chernak and Kremlin leaders have come to terms in Moscow on the stationing of Soviet troops in Czechoslovakia. The treaty won't be signed, however, until later, reportedly in Prague. It's believed the treaty will keep some troops on Czechoslovak soil indefinitely. NATO announced today it's setting up a special new command to improve air surveillance of the growing Soviet fleet in the Mediterranean. It's estimated that the Soviets now have more than 50 ships in the Mediterranean, and 8 arrivals during the past 10 days were reported. The United States said today it's consulting with other hemispheric nations on whether to recognize the new military regime in Panama headed by Colonel Jose Pinilla. At the same time, Washington again voiced disapproval of a call to arms by deposed President Arnulfo Arias while he's exiled in the U.S.-controlled Canal Zone. So far, Arias' call to try to regain power is in the harassment stage. Bert Quint reports.
The shock troops of this harassment, as always in these cases, are the youngsters, university, high school, and even grade school students. The first ones into the street were from a high school near the Canal Zone. They refused to resume classes after the weekend and swore to fight the new military regime. They seized a truck and tried to overturn it, simply to show their displeasure. Soon, troops stationed nearby started firing in the air and took off after the youths. The students fled. They regrouped and were urged by their leaders to have patience. We are going to fight, they said, but we must wait until we have made our plans. Throughout the day, the restless teenagers did wait, but toward evening they lost their patience, surging closer and closer to and past their own barricades, on toward where troops remained discreetly on guard. The youths began dumping garbage on the street, a traditional anti-government tactic here. The troops trotted up and, trying to disperse them, fired blank cartridges in the air and tear gas down the street. After a moment, a few shots came back, real ones, from the school. But, a guard officer said later, apparently fired by someone who did not know how to shoot. Now, the guard opened fire with real bullets, too, and charged the building. Their officers shouted to the troops to be careful. I don't want anybody killed, one captain kept repeating, and nobody was. The guard took a couple of dozen prisoners, but none of the students were shot. So far, the guard has exercised a good deal of restraint. It has been able to because the threat has not been very great. But if Arnulfo Arias makes good on his promise to escalate the trouble, there will be no more blank bullets. All of the bullets will be real. Bert Quint, CBS News, Panama City.
President Johnson today signed the bill authorizing $575 million for various health programs, including construction and modernization of hospitals and establishment of treatment centers for alcoholics and addicts. He said the programs, in his words, will greatly strengthen the right of every citizen to have good health. Rhode Island Governor John Chapey's 14-year-old daughter, Tribby, died today at a Providence hospital 3 days after being kicked in the head by a horse. The Chapeys have 5 other children. Prices closed generally higher today in the New York Stock Exchange. The volume was 13,400,000 shares. The exchange index gained 11 cents.
Do you remember what it was like learning to write? It was one of the most awkward things you ever faced. But in time, you did learn. And it was a good way to communicate. Today in business, it isn't good enough. It isn't fast enough. So now it's time to learn something that is. At first, you'll feel awkward with dictation equipment. But with IBM equipment, you just talk over your mistakes. You'll be dictating letters 4 times faster than you're now writing them in about a week, which isn't bad, considering it took you 2 years of grade school to learn to write.
The question often has been asked this campaign 68, do the political polls create public opinion as well as sample it? For an opinion, we go now to Eric Severide in Washington.
In the world of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. An American presidential election campaign is a blind affair, full of far more uncertainties than certainties, more emotions than facts. It is a thick, drifting cloud of charges and countercharges, momentary enthusiasms, fleeting images, hard rock prejudices, a guessing game. But there is a one-eyed man present, and his powers are close to kingly, even though he doesn't really want them and doesn't admit he has them. This man is the professional opinion poller. His function has not exactly become a fourth branch of government, but during a campaign it becomes an enormous influence. There are, this year, about 200 such men busily sampling public opinion concerning this critical election. They range from very small outfits hired by the individual candidates themselves to take soundings in specific states and districts, up to the large nationwide operations like Gallup and Harris. The samplings of voters' feelings or alleged feelings range from 300 or 400 voters to 1,500 or 1,600 across the country. The reliability of these polls ranges from the almost worthless attempts at street corner surveys and postcard mailings to the careful extended questioning of voters inside their homes. The responsible pollsters are honest men, and they are not accountable for what newspapers, broadcast stations, or candidates do with their findings. And their findings portray voter feelings as of the time of polling only, and are not meant to be a forecast of what voters will actually feel and do on election day. But it can no longer be pretended that the polls merely portray and do not affect. Those neat, hard little figures every few days are the closest thing to certainties the candidates have, and every candidate's entourage is obsessed by them. They directly influence the candidate as to what areas he will skip, what areas he will concentrate upon, the issues he will emphasize, the issues he will fuzz over or say nothing about. To the candidate running ahead in the polls, the money easily comes in. For the underdog in the polls, many sources of funds dry up. And sometimes campaign workers are recruited with ease or with difficulty, depending on the polls. Few authorities feel certain as to what ought to be done about political opinion polls, if anything. But if the campaigns affect the election day results, then the polls affect those results, because they surely affect the campaigns. A handful of private individuals have this unique extra-legal influence over the national electorate. It bears some thinking about. Walter?
And that's the way it is. Tuesday, October 15th, 1968. This is Walter Cronkite, CBS News. Good night.
Arthritis? Me? I'm only 28. I just have a few little aches and pains. Nothing as serious as arthritis.
That's the way many people react when a doctor says they have arthritis. They've heard that arthritis is a crippling disease of the aged. In fact, though, arthritis is a disease of all ages, and it usually starts with minor pains. The aching in your joints when you wake up, the twinge in your shoulder when you reach for something. If you notice these symptoms, see your doctor at once. Early treatment is extremely important. As part of this treatment, aspirin is what doctors recommend. Nothing else is so universally acclaimed as aspirin for hours of relief from minor arthritis pain and its stiffness. So please remember this. Bayer aspirin is pure aspirin, not just part aspirin, and Bayer is the best. If you think your little aches and pains might be a warning of arthritis, see your doctor. When aspirin is recommended, Bayer works wonders.
This has been the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite. Parents and children are caught up in a war of values that